generations. And now, the power of two restores the one.
We got a bidet! Hey everybody, and welcome back to another video. In this week's Shoot the Sheev, we thought it would be kind of fun to talk about some of our favorite, I would say, Star Wars romances. It's Valentine's Day today, so we thought it kind of fit perfectly with the holiday. What I wanted to do is touch on at least one from each trilogy. I got a couple for some, and also some projects that are not within the trilogies. I got one from Rebels per se, and one that will be a little bit of a surprise. Sarah tells me she had one too that was a surprise, and I'm kind of wondering if we have the same surprise. We'll find out later. So maybe we'll
You'll
just
be shocked by the ones that I picked.
well, we're gonna kind of let's go in order from starting with the prequels, and then we'll just kind of work our way up. So the prequels were the first movies that I got to see in theaters for Star Wars. And so the first real Star Wars romance that I got to see on the big screen was between Anakin and Padme. And it was quite interesting because I remember like at the age that I was, which was probably I think that I was 5 years old. Yeah, 4 or 5, one of the two. No, maybe 6, somewhere in there. Just very young. I remember seeing, Anakin, and I remember seeing Padme, and at that age, I hadn't processed that Padme was actually a little bit older than what I had thought, because she was, a queen. What I saw was, yay, lightsabers, not, ooh, I can pick up on all the politics. So I thought it was kind of interesting later on to figure out that she was a bit older than him, probably good 4 or 5 years at least. I don't remember her exact age. But I find it
I thought it was
interesting.
more like 10.
He was about 10. She was like 15 or 16,
Mm,
being the
I guess
oldest
you're right.
or being the youngest queen of Naboo. And then, when we get episode 2, it's a bit more like, okay, I understand this now. Like they both look like grown adults, so it was a bit easier to comprehend as a kid. But it was also very weird, Anakin is like gushing over Padme, and he says some very weird things, like almost stalkerish. Like he says, he tells her like, "Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you," and stuff like that. And it's like, what? It was years since they'd seen each other, and this was like the first time they'd seen each other since way back when. And so, I don't know about you, but I got some creeper vibes out of that.
Well, they didn't really know each other all that well, you know? They only spent like a handful of days together and then they were apart for so long. It's not like they'd been friends for a decade and then, separated.
Right. I mean, she even straight up tells him, "You'll always be that little boy I knew on Tatooine," which is like the biggest friend zone thing you could say to a guy that, has been thinking about this obviously gorgeous senator that he's been wanting to at least see again. And, the first thing that she says to him is, "Oh, you're that little boy. No, I'm big boy now," kind of a thing. And we kind of get that attitude the rest of the movie because there's a lot of times where Anakin is trying to like say, "I am a man," and "I am a Jedi," and blah 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 blah. And Padme's like, "Know your place, dude. Like you're still a learner. You're this, and that." And we definitely see, who's in charge between the two. I don't think Padme ever really lets up from that. Um, episode 3, you know, we get to see the tail end of their marriage, technically, um, for lack of a better word, because he ends up killing her. But you know, she's pregnant. They were about to start a family, and they were about to have a arguably a great family moving forward. But with all the different things that Anakin had going on, it was very hard to psychologically handle a lot of that stuff. And so, unfortunately, in my opinion, probably the best love story that I saw as a kid became a tragedy, and that's kind of unfortunate. And what's interesting is, you know, if you really don't dive into Star Wars, if you're just kind of watching the movies and taking it for what the movies are, you don't really understand how much Anakin truly loved Padme. Like, if you dive into the comics or you read some of the books, Padme never leaves Vader's mind. He's always thinking about her. At one point, he visits her grave so that he can go see her. It's even to the point where he wanted to essentially steal, I would say, quote unquote, the soul of Mustafar to try to resurrect her, or at least be able to speak to her on the other side of the realm, like, you know, when she's in the passed on realm, so to speak. So Anakin never lets up from the love of his life, and he also it continuously fights for it. And unfortunately, it's his downfall for all that stuff, because that's the kind of thing that really swings him in the balance between, you know, having that little bit of light inside of him and the darkness, because eventually it transfers over to his son. You know, somebody actually loves me. I am, you know, this monster, but they're willing to see past all that and, you know, try to make me back to what I was. And so when Vader would have all these tendencies of thinking about Padme and having that imbalance, Palpatine would shock the crap out of him and hurt him to try to make him stop. So it's
So sad.
interesting. Yeah, it's sad. It's interesting to think about how, you know, no matter how much pain he had to go through and how much sorrow he had to live with, the fact that he was the one that, you know, killed his wife, even though he was trying to save her, he had to live with that guilt the rest of his life. And that would suck, quite
Yeah.
honestly. So, Sarah, what was the one that you had for prequel trilogy?
Okay, this is gonna be kind of a little bit of a surprise to you, or maybe a shock. Literally, Shmi and Palpatine. Is it a thing? Is it not a thing? Some people say that, you know, because she says she was just like gifted with this pregnancy, but it had to come from somewhere. And some people say it came from Palpatine, don't they?
Some people believe it. Um, I believed it at first that he did something to mess with the midichlorians within her and basically made her kind of the Virgin Mary of Star Wars. And then, you know, the whole thing came out about Rise of Skywalker with Rey and Kylo kissing, and it's technically kissing cousins, and then Disney was just like, "Oh no, that's not how it went down." Even though the picture clearly looks like Palpatine is doing something to Shmi, but
In the
uh,
comics, yep.
yeah, in the comics. So some people believe it. Technically, they're wrong because Disney says it's not a thing, but it's kind of like the audience is like, the fire truck is red, and Disney's like, no, it's not, and it's like, yes, it is, and it's no, it's not. It's our fire truck. You can't tell me it's red, kind of a thing. So,
A complicated, not romance relationship.
honest,
There's no romance in that love.
honestly, it's probably, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's probably just adds on to the mishandling of Star Wars, because if they hadn't kissed, nobody would have thought anything of it. But because they kissed, everybody was like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Especially because, I mean, we have some friends that are very liberal minded, and they're very open minded. And when we asked them about the Rise of Skywalker, they agreed with us. The one thing that really didn't seem to fit when we first watched the movie was the kiss. And honestly, I thought that would have been something that these people would have been open to and been like, "Oh, great! It's Star Wars now. It's Disney." But it wasn't. That wasn't the reaction. So there's a lot of people that thought like, "Well, it doesn't really fit. Maybe it's kind of a forced thing by Disney." But yeah, again, don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole.
I told you you'd be shocked.
I will tell you that was not the one that I thought you were insinuating about. So I have a surprise for you and you all later. So
With
yeah,
the
those
prequels?
what?
With the prequels?
No, not with
Oh,
the.
okay.
So I want to move on to Rebels. Sarah and I got to enjoy Rebels together, all 4 seasons, back to back to back to back, and we got to enjoy watching the relationship unfold between Kanan and Hera, which was really cool to see. Like it was arguably one of the times I'd probably say that I, cared about someone's relationship in Star Wars in a very long time. We'll be talking
It was
more
such
about,
a it was such a slow build. It was just perfect.
yeah, it was realistic, right?
Yeah. Yes. They butted heads sometimes, but they found ways to make things work.
Right. Which we'll talk a little bit more about some stuff later that didn't exactly fit that kind of a um uh development, we'll say. But yeah, so Kanan and Hera, it seemed like kind of an unlikely couple. Speaking is hard. They seemed like an unlikely couple because they were completely different species. One was human, one was Twi'lek, and I don't think we'd really seen that in Star Wars before. We had, 2 different species that were in a relationship together. At least I hadn't seen it. Maybe it's somewhere in the books, but again, for me, it was the first time. So I thought it was kind of an interesting dynamic to have that in Rebels, especially because I kind of felt like with the first season, Rebels was maybe geared a little more towards kids, but as the series went on, it got more and more serious content, more and more these relationships that were developing where, it's not just a basically adventure of the day for little kids. It's, these are some characters we actually care about. And that really transitioned over to Ahsoka eventually, as far as, caring about the characters and the relationships together. But I thought the Kanan and Hera one was really neat.
Yeah, they kind of hinted in that show about Sabine and Ezra as it seemed more like a forbidden romance because as a Jedi you're not supposed to love, even though Kanan did. But I feel like that's kind of what made their relationship more interesting is because and that's why it had such a slow build, right? Is because he knew it was wrong for Jedi to be in love and stuff like that, but that you kind of can't help your feelings and you can't just like, okay, that's it. I'm done loving you now. Like we can't love each other anymore or whatever. Like it was just so complicated. And so I think, really drilled that into Ezra, and that's why his relationship with Sabine was so distant. But she was also a lot colder than Sabine was a lot colder than Hera. She wasn't really as into it, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. I think she was very along the lines of, is this a brother sister kind of relationship, or is this a romantic relationship? And so, you have that conflict between those two ideas, and unless one person makes the first mention of it or the first move of some sort, then it never ends up becoming anything because they both assume they're kind of in that brother sister relationship between the two of them. But yeah, when you're talking about, the Jedi way, you can't, you know, love the way that a normal human being does. it's a hard life to be a Jedi. You know, people they're being asked to take a human element out of themselves. You know, there's no human being that doesn't feel anything about anything, you know? Everybody has a feeling about something, everybody has emotions, but yet the Jedi wanted them to shut it off. And so it's interesting to see how some of these relationships develop, knowing that they don't have a council looking over their shoulder all the time. Um, Most of them died. Maybe they had it coming. I don't know. Um, Anakin made sure of that. Have you ever wondered what Amazon coffins are and what they're full of? Well, we got you covered here on the channel. Check out our playlist of our Amazon coffin unboxings, where Sarah and I open up boxes that have Amazon returns, and we share with all of you what we get in each of those boxes. If you ever wanted to get into liquidation and want to know what types of things you can find, check us out. Now back to our show. Let's see. So that's the one I had for Rebels, and then you mentioned Sabine and Ezra here. Original trilogy, you know, I would say the iconic romance relationship in the original trilogy was Han and Leia. We definitely had a what the world situation within the original trilogy with Luke and Leia. But I would say, even like for myself, growing up as a kid, when I first saw these movies, you know, I feel like when we see the first movie and we think about Luke's character and Han's character, I would believe that Luke would be the one that would be more likely to be, you know, the one that ends up with Leia if we didn't have any other context from the other movies. Just because he seemed like, you know, the nicer dude, somebody that seemed to care a little bit, even though Han did care about people, he just had a hard time showing it. I think that Luke would have been the more uh, assumed choice that would have happened. But as we see throughout the rest of the original trilogy, it's really not a thing that Luke and Leia should be a thing. Of course, you know, they're brother and sister. Hopefully they didn't find that a little too late, if you know what I'm talking about. But then we do eventually get some development from Han and Leia, and eventually I think what's really cool about that relationship is that, you know, Han was really, his character is interesting if you think about it. Like,
Makes me so sad every time when he realizes that Luke and Leia have a relationship, but he doesn't know what kind, so he assumes it's romantic. And he just goes, "Don't worry, I won't get in the way." Like, my heart breaks when he says that line every time. Like, no, she's meant to be with you.
I mean, he definitely feels some. So, like, when he says that line in particular, it's very quick, a quick turnaround when she's like, "Of course I love him. He's my brother," and then Han is like, "What?" It makes me wonder if there's things he saw that we didn't see on screen, and it's just processing in his brain. Oh, what the heck? But earlier, because that the film you're talking about is Return of the Jedi. Earlier in that film, you really see Han's kind of, I wouldn't say disappointment, but I don't know what the word is. It's when he walks out because Leia and Luke had just had the discussion about, you know, they're actually brother and sister, and that Vader is her father, and she's trying to process all this stuff. And Han comes outside and he's like, "What's wrong?" And she says, "I just want to be alone for a little while." And she doesn't want to talk about it. And he gets angry. He says, because he knows Luke just left, he's like, "Could you tell Luke? Is that who you could tell?" And you could tell, you know, that he has this dynamic of like, I am fed up with this stuff. You know, are you with, like you said, are you with him? Are you not with him? Is he special because you feel this way about him, and that's why you're telling him these things and not me? So it's an interesting dynamic for Han and Leia, but I also think it's an interesting dynamic for Han himself, because in the original movie, Han seems to be kind of the standoffish kind of person. Uh, he definitely has like the idea of wanting to be with another woman because he does joke around with Luke a little bit in that movie where he's like, what do you think? A princess and a guy like me? And Luke is like, absolutely not. But we can see that Han is kind of thinking about it, even though he comes off super strong. But also makes me think back to Solo. So I know A New Hope wasn't out when Solo came out, but there he had a girlfriend and he seemed to care about her very much, seemed to take care of her. Um, and so it makes me wonder, like, did he start off as this super caring person and then something happened in between? Maybe it was Kira that, really made him second guess being a little bit softer towards women. Or like, did something happen in between there where he had to put up maybe this front, and that's where this is coming from with the original trilogy?
Well, let me remind you what our good friend Kira did to him. She broke his heart into itty bitty pieces. He did his best to wait for her on the other side and try to figure out a way to get back to her for a very long time, only to find out she's like, "We're not a thing anymore. Like, what are you doing? Get out of here. Go on, get." It's like, come on now. He just spent how long trying to get back to you, and you haven't been doing the same?
Right. So like maybe that was the one thing that really, shifted how he goes about things. Um, but yeah, I can't even imagine, someone that you had been, it wasn't just a relationship between the two of them. I mean, they were having a living together, they were doing jobs together, they were making money, living credit to credit together, trying to just survive. And,
Well, and their
like
plan was to get away and like basically live happily ever after.
right. And then when he finally sees her, and he probably had in the back of his mind when he saw her, like, now I can have that, like you said, happily ever after. But then she's like, I'm with Beckett, working with him. So it's interesting to think about his character development and think through, what was he thinking? What's he feeling? Uh, all these things that probably back then for the original trilogy wasn't talked about a lot for men. And nowadays, it's, in my opinion, interesting to dive into.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Solo, and that was the standalone film that I was going to mention for one of the love connections that I had to pick outside the box ones because I knew you would cover like the basics, right? So the one that I'm bringing up is Lando and L3. Yeah, buddy.
Oh yeah, eh, not one of my favorites. That's one of the weirdest relationships ever in Star Wars. So go ahead, you can cover that one.
So Lando, so it's coming from Solo, right? So it's the prequel or kind of backstory for Han Solo. In very much a way, it's kind of a prequel or backstory for Lando too, even though he's not the main focus for like the whole film. But Lando has a robot or a droid. I don't know what kind she is. She's not a protocol droid, right?
I honestly don't know the type of droid. That was one I did not want to pay attention to.
So she she very much has a it's kind of like pro I, I don't
She's
want to
a
throw the word feminism isn't
she's
in
a
there because it's not about men versus women. It's about droids versus humans. She's trying to get rights for droids. Think for yourself. Don't do what you're programmed to do. Rise above all of that stuff. But it's for droids, right? Which is what makes it so weird and kind of cringy because they're not living things. They're robots. But the romance connection is that, being that it's Lando's droid, they have a very close connection. Her heart or brain or what have you is kind of what becomes the heart of the Millennium Falcon towards the end of the film. So she does play a very big role in all of that with her programming. But she tells, what did she tell? She tells Kira basically that, like, back off on Lando because he's mine. We're not supposed to be the thing, but it's a forbidden love. It'd never work, but yet I love him kind of a thing. And it's very weird. It's very awkward. It's very cringy. It's not one of my favorites either, but it's one of those that's kind of like it's so bad you can't help but laugh. So that was what I wanted to contribute to us talking about love connections in Star Wars.
It makes me wonder, as I never really thought about it, it makes me wonder if there's any sort of connections that they tried to make in Solo with her being the computer of the ship, if there's any like slight things that they tried to play off of some verbiage from the original trilogy to make the connection, but I haven't looked into that, but who knows? Definitely the weirdest one
Well,
of
it's not like the computer in the Falcon ever talks in the original trilogy or ever really, you know.
right.
It's
Um,
more just like using her brain, so to speak.
right. The when you were trying to describe what type of droid she is, a lot of times people identify her as a social justice droid.
Yes, thank you. That is a much better term for it.
I don't think that's like the like model of the droid, but that's usually what she's referred to.
It makes more sense.
All right, and we covered Han and Leia. Sarah covered Han and L3.
Lando and L3.
Lando and L3, sorry. And we briefly covered Luke and Leia. I think that's really something we don't need to discuss too much. Once they found out, and then they stopped. Um, so here's the surprise one that I had. We ready for this?
Drum roll, please. Da 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 da. What you got?
Chewie and Mala.
Oh yes.
We have our little Wookiee romance from the holiday special. We do get to actually meet Chewie's wife, Mala, so that was really cool. Um, they don't really have a whole lot of interactions together because most of the movie, Chewie is trying to come home, and then by the time he gets home, the movie's over. So we do get to at least learn about Mala a little bit with her. We know that she likes to cook. We know she likes to watch cooking shows. Um,
She tries to provide for her family.
she does, and she does very well. But that's just a little fun one to throw in there. There's not much we can really say about it just because we don't have a whole lot to actually reference.
They have a son.
They do have a son. They have Lumpy.
Lumpy.
That makes, how does, I mean, I guess they would have to, I wonder what Lumpy is in the Wookiee language. Like, what roar do they have to say his name?
It's a good question.
Questions that need answers. Have you seen The Mandalorian? Do you wonder what Operation Cinder was that they mentioned in this show? Well, we got you covered because we have an entire playlist dedicated to the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign which highlights Operation Cinder. So if you check out our playlist, you'll be able to see what actually happened with Operation Cinder and know what they're talking about with the show. Now back to ours. Alright, the final section that I wanted to talk about here is the sequel trilogy, unless there was something you wanted to talk about with like Mando or anything like that.
No, not in particular. The two that I had, I've already brought up, so I think we're ready for sequel trilogy.
All right, so starting with the first film of the sequel trilogy, I would say what we all thought was going to really start to flourish in the films to come was Finn and Rey, which nothing really came of it. And some of us even thought maybe there was going to be something going on with Finn and Poe Dameron just because they had quite the bromance the entire sequel trilogy. As far as
Well,
I,
at one point when they're like falling in the quicksand and they think they're about to die, that's when Finn wants to tell Rey something and he doesn't actually get to tell her. So it's kind of it's one of two things, right? Either it's I feel the force too, or I have feelings for you.
it was confirmed that he was going to tell her about his force sensitivity.
Mm.
But then he ended up not saying anything, the rest of the movie. So,
Because we're alive.
yeah. Oh, and Poe's right there, and supposedly Poe can't know about that, um, which is still kind of weird. But anyway, so we kind of have those that we started off with, and then we had Ryan Johnson come into play, and
Hey,
supposedly Ryan Johnson is a genius. And instead of developing anything between Rey and Finn, or even potentially Poe and Finn, if that was the route they wanted to go, instead, we got Finn and Rose. Probably the relationship that had the least amount of substance ever, but yet she wanted to sacrifice her life for him towards the end of the film. Uh,
she says a line that should be really impactful. It's something along the lines of the ones you love are the worst ones worth living for or worth dying for or something. I'm butchering it because it's something, well, I'm butchering it because I don't remember, but it could have been such a powerful statement if it was actually between two characters that had enough time to build a real relationship, but because, as you mentioned, there's no real substance to the relationship, it just felt like an empty statement. Like there was no oomph behind what she was saying. It wasn't believable.
Right. And even if you think about some of the more iconic relationships within Star Wars, like Han and Leia, Anakin and Padme, Hera and Kanan, we don't see them for 2 hours and then they're necking in the back. They need to have time to develop these things. And it sure seemed like right there at the end that they were going to kiss. And I don't believe they did. I don't remember, honestly. I don't think they did. But
How about some shots of dreamy eyes even? I don't think we even got that with them, where they're like looking at each other, having that love connection just with the eyes.
what was so awkward because it seemed like Finn wanted nothing to do with it. But Rose was just like, you're mine, and I'm gonna be your woman, kind of a thing. So I thought that was probably one of the more cringy ones just because like you said, we didn't get time to actually be with these characters long enough where that seemed like it would pay off. If she was somebody in the first movie and there was some time, Ryan Johnson, between episode 7 and episode 8, then we could have believed a little bit more that, they had been off on some adventures, they've hung out and done things together, and now, maybe they're kind of getting to that point where they could, be in a relationship. So I would argue that that was probably another mishandling by Lucasfilm where this ended up falling flat on its face. The other one I had for the sequel trilogy, we touched on a little bit, but it's the Rey and Kylo relationship. I I really liked the idea of this whole dyad thing, where there's a connection in the Force, and you know in the prequel trilogy, we have this idea of the rule of two from the Sith, and then we had Luke Skywalker come through, we had Anakin come through. Those two, super powerful Jedi were not able to get rid of the Sith once and for all. And then here, we finally get what is known as a dyad in the Force, a pairing of two, which is kind of like the reciprocal of the rule of two to the Sith, and they were able to, eventually overpower the Sith. I don't personally believe that that had to be a romantic relationship. Let me ask you this, Sarah. And you can answer this the way you want to. I know we're married, but answer it the way you wish. Let's say you just went through something crazy with somebody, and the first you met them, things weren't so great. You went through this big problem or whatever. You both survived. You made your way through it, and the two of you kiss. Would you think that that would be because there's a relationship bond between the two of you, or do you think it's natural for like an almost like an excitement of, oh my God, we just did that, and then the two people kiss? What do you think about that situation?
Well, I'm gonna answer it kind of differently. There was a very similar situation in Star Wars where we had a couple that met and butted heads and ended up working together and did something really powerful together, and they went through hell and they came out the other side, and they were also kind of on death's door, much like Kylo was in this scenario. And you know what? They were just friends, and that's all it was. And it was Rogue One, and it was perfect, and it was beautiful, and it didn't seem forced. And I feel like that seemed so much more natural than this random kiss they threw in here between Rey and Kylo. It it didn't seem it just didn't seem natural. It doesn't make sense to me. I could see like we just made it through something crazy. Let's hug. I could see that making sense, but a kiss that just seems weird.
Weird and awkward. Like I'm thinking like, what if that would have happened to me? What if I would have been on the other end of I think it was Ray that like pulled him in. I don't recall that they both like pulled each other as a mutual thing. I thought it was like her going after him, but
I don't remember the exact specific of who kissed who.
I feel like if I was in that instance, I would have been like processing. I would have thought, I guess that's what they needed. Like, I guess that was their reaction. It's not my reaction, but maybe it's theirs. And so it is what it is. But it, because it felt so out of place, we really don't understand, is it, uh, is it, relationship based because, they've been through a lot. They, they seem to be a couple that could happen in process and through a little bit more time. But like 2 hours ago, that dude was trying to kill her. And she technically almost killed him, but she healed him. And then 2 hours later, he's like, oh my God, even though I killed so many people in the past, I'm all better now. I took some NyQuil, it's great. And now we can go take on the Sith. And so I don't believe that kind of a turnaround can be realistic. I think she would have needed to, you know, have some ground rules with him and actually have him kind of prove who he is and not just be like, oh, now I'm Ben. Kylo is in the past.
Oh, you mean like in Kenobi when third sister or whatever her name is? Help me with her name here.
What, Reva?
Yeah, when Reva just all of a sudden decides not to kill Luke, so magically she's a perfect human being.
Yeah. I think she kind of saw Vader in herself, and that's a little bit what changed her mind. But even before that, she should have been dead. And that's another rabbit hole that we probably shouldn't go down.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole. I just meant like you make one good decision and now all of a sudden you're a fantastic person. Like you don't have a bad reputation at all anymore. It's all forgiven, all gone.
Which is kind of funny we bring that up because I do remember that there is a behind the scenes thing. And I thought this was so cool. This is the small rabbit hole. I guess I'll go down here towards the end. Um, there was a discussion for Return of the Jedi where basically one of the co-writers was saying to George, how in the world does this dude that has killed so many people, being Vader, how is he able to just within seconds turn to the light side and then be an eternal, force ghost? And it was interesting because I think George said something along the lines of, well, like, didn't Hitler have a god kind of a thing? Didn't they have a religion they believed in? Or looking at the guy that was asking the question, don't you have someone like a god that you believe in, and you believe that they're gonna, get rid of all your sins when you go to heaven or wherever it's supposed to be, and then you're good to go? And he was like, you know what? You're right. I mean, it's interesting to think about because when George had Star Wars, George is an anthropologist. Whether you guys know it or not, our audience, he studied anthropology, and that's what made his Star Wars so great, is because he understood how people worked. And that's why we got such dynamic and involved relationships within these characters, and tendencies that made sense. Whereas, now that we're with Disney, we spent $4 billion and we got to get some money back. And so they just kind of don't even pay attention to that whole human side of things. So I think that's why some of these sequel trilogy relationships feel so out of place, but yet the ones with George's films feel so perfect for their characters. So
Yeah. And then there's Rogue One, which I kind of touched on, but I guess just to kind of wrap it up here, it's like an anti-romance, right? Because they're butting heads. They have cute little moments where they kind of, see eye to eye. They work on things together, and there is so much character development and relationship development between those two. And then where does it go? It goes nowhere. And because, well, for one, they're dead, but for two, because they
spoiler
just
alert.
they're just friends, and they're really good friends. Started as enemies, and they came out as really good friends. And sometimes that's all there is, and that's all that you need. And it was the anti-romance relationship that I think was just perfect.
Yeah, we don't always have to end up with sunshine and rainbows on every situation. Not everybody can be turned back from the dark side, which, they did for Kylo Ren, even though he wasn't supposed to. That's been confirmed as of lately, from Adam Driver. So, yeah, lots of crazy things. And I wish we had more of that approach of not everything has to be great for everybody. It's the galaxy is not a clean and amazing place all the time. We've seen it all over in Star Wars. And so I feel like they're almost making it eventually going to feel like there's no consequence for people, which isn't true. But that was our discussion on some of the notable Star Wars romances throughout the films and shows. I'm sure all of you have different ones that you enjoy as well. But if you enjoyed this type of video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We do Shoot the Sheaves twice a month at a bare minimum, and sometimes 3 times. Just depends on the topics that pop up throughout the month. So turn on that notifications and you will be notified when future ones drop. And check out our previous playlist. We have a whole bunch of Shoot the Sheev podcasts here available already. Check those out. Drops a like if you like the video, and drops a comment letting us know some of your favorite Star Wars romances from throughout the shows, the movies, the TV shows, video games, books. One that we didn't mention that we probably could have is Starkiller and Juno from The Force Unleashed. That was a pretty good one too. But all the ones that we just did are canon, and that one is not. But as always, everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.